Okay, I'd like to call to order the February 14th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And the first order of business is the approval of the minutes from January 24th, which were in your packet. Any comments on the minutes?
Ooh, they look nice and short too.
Yeah, pretty short. I'll make a motion we approve them.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes as presented, say aye.
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 Okay. Correspondence. So what are these?
We do have some correspondence that was sent since the last meeting. We have a letter from Nancy Cheney regarding the 3rd Street corridor, and I passed the letter around so everybody could take a look at it. And I think we distributed it via email beforehand, so everybody's probably had a chance to look through it. It pertains to 3rd Street corridor and the 3rd Street bridge, and then some recommendations to have planning and zoning give some input and maybe potential actions in the future to work with Transportation Commission on a variety of traffic-related, street corridor issues relating to the 3rd Street corridor and then the city really in general. So.
Okay, we have, what's the second?
The second is correspondence from Linda Paul. It's in regards to a community design workshop that, along with Citizens for Livable Community, are putting together on February 24th at the 1912 Center, and she had sent out a press release that forwarded to Wendy and myself to be forwarded to everybody else on the commission to let you know of this. And I also have, they're proposing to have this workshop at the 1912 Center with Professor Ayad Rahmani with WSU Design and Construction Department. And they're just exploring different ways that the 3rd Street and Paradise Creek could be used in the future. Maybe a pocket park, and it's more of just a design charrette on that date, and so she wanted to forward that on. I also have a letter that the mayor had distributed, and he sent this to department heads and commission chairs, and he wanted it forwarded also to all the commission members of the city. Pretty much this is in regards to a response to Linda's letter and Linda's invitation to this community design workshop. And I'll just kind of go through and paraphrase it, but essentially it's a lot of public input has been thought of, and a pretty in-depth public process has gone through in order to arrive at the recommendations for the 3rd Street corridor, as well as the multimodal bridge across Paradise Creek. And the council voted unanimously on February 6th in order to advance with the Plan C that the Transportation Commission had worked on through their subcommittee, and then ultimately voted to have council approve that. And so council did vote to approve Plan C, but to have a consultant take a look at the safety of that plan. And so that was the direction from council. And so the mayor has said that he will not attend, but anybody acting as an individual is certainly welcome to attend the design workshop if they so choose.
Okay, we have several items of communication here, and I commend them to your reading, and perhaps material in them for bringing to future discussions in future meetings. So go ahead and read them. Any other commission communications?
Well, this is Wendy talking. I received the same to letters, and also just 10 minutes before this meeting, saw Mike's forward of Mayor Lambert's response to Linda Paul's request for the workshop, or the invitation to workshop. So I felt, and so I think that the mayor's response is fairly conclusive about, in terms of any kind of official participation of commissions, although if people wanted to, are welcome as individuals. But in terms of Nancy Cheney's letter, it had dealt with multiple issues, and I think they need to be kind of parsed into several topics for future discussion, and they really align to some degree with we are already underway in terms of wanting to correspond, find avenues to correspond better with and coordinate with the Transportation Commission and Public Works. So I think we're kind of already on it, but I don't know how the rest of you feel after reading that correspondence.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. The next item of business is the Transportation Commission meeting report. The Transportation Commission met on February 8th. There were a number of interesting discussions. One was the presentation by the Smart Transportation Executive Director, who was talking about some studies that are ongoing, and they're soliciting some input from the Transportation Commission with regard to the possible changes in routing and scheduling of the bus system. Of course, there's possibility of a third route. There's a possibility of slightly rerouting existing routes, a possibility of changes in the duration of service. So these are all on the table, and there is a committee that will be being formed, including some members of the Transportation Commission, to ultimately make do some research and make some recommendations on the alternatives. Fairly short timeline. I think it's things are supposed to come to a head within a couple of months. So expect to hear more on that. We also met for a while with representatives of Gritman, talking again about parking issues in the neighborhood of the hospital. They've presented some revised ideas, and of course at this stage this is talking, but not really a proposal. Several meetings ago when they met with us, they were suggesting that the northbound couplet in the neighborhood of the hospital could actually be used for permit-based parking. That did not receive a particularly good reception from the Transportation Commission, but what they're continuing to propose is the possible use of the parking between the new Gritman building and the current hospital, essentially South Main, for trying to make it more clearly designated for patient parking. And there would be a possibility that some parking permits might be issued for people who are undergoing procedures that they're proposing that it be designated as 2-hour parking. And there'd be a possibility for parking permits for people who are undergoing procedures that would have longer than a 2-hour duration.
So faster.
Yeah. There was a concern by the commission about having part of the controlled parking in the city be 3-hour duration and other parts being 2-hour duration, it seemed to us that it might have considerable problems for the parking enforcement people working on 2 different time schedules. And we requested the city staff give us some idea of what that might involve. But at this stage, it's still talking. This is not an official proposal. They're bringing things to us and see how we react.
Were they worried particularly about patients or staff or both?
Now they're making a concerted effort to try to get staff to move further away to open space for patients, and I guess they're having some effect at that, partly by keeping watch and seeing when employees are parking in the wrong place and making a suggestion that they move. But they do have a employee parking across Jackson. It's not popular, partly because it's there is not a direct crosswalk across Jackson in a convenient place to get to it. And the state is resistant to the idea of putting a crosswalk in what would be a more convenient place for access to the parking lot. But apparently they are having some success. Part of the issue here is that Gritman is doing the planning, and the people who park in the area are both patients and employees of a number of organizations beyond Gritman, Moscow Family Medicine, etc. And apparently the suggestion was that Gritman was getting better results from harassing their employees about not parking nearby than some of the other occupants of the neighborhood. So I think there's probably going to have to be some consultation amongst the various interested parties down there to come up with some, or at least to analyze some of the further plans and make various suggestions. So again, this is in process. We did deal at that meeting with 2 interesting requests for vacation of public easements. One of them dealt with Landy Lane, which is a little spur road at the moment off the north side of Hillcrest, and it goes about 300 feet. And the area beyond has gone through several different revisions of subdivision proposals, 3 lots, 4 lots, etc. It's currently an open field. There is a public walkway right away through it. There have been various proposals for a turnaround circle in it. None of them have worked terribly well. What was in front of us was the proposal to vacate a whole series of overlapping right-of-ways, which didn't work very well, and to try to, after vacating them, to come up with a new subdivision which instead of a traffic circle, has a hammerhead, which happens to fit better in the configuration, and preserves the pedestrian right-of-way. We voted to support it, council. The other one was an alley to the south of C Street. I used to live up in that neighborhood, but I was totally unaware there was an issue is that one of the landowners immediately adjacent to that area, that alley on C Street, needs a little bit wider lot. And I'm not quite sure, is it a setback requirement that's they don't meet, or is it a lot size requirement? There's something that they don't meet.
It was a lot size requirement, so
Okay.
they were looking at, vacating a portion of that to include additional square footage to get up to
Yeah.
certain size.
The proposal is to take what's currently I guess probably a 15, 16 foot right-of-way, alley right-of-way, and to vacate 1 foot of it on the east side to get them up to the required lot size. Looking at the pictures and looking at Google Maps of the area, the alley is presently essentially unoccupied, unused. It has a utility easement, but I'm not sure it actually has any underground pipes in it. Does it have an elevated power line above it?
I think there may be power lines that run
Yeah.
above it, but
I think I know where it is, like it runs between C and D.
Yeah, between C and A.
C and A, oh, okay, it's not.
No,
one
it
that-
runs
it's not
south
the one I
of
was
C.
thinking of.
You know, as I said, I used to live in that area, and I was unaware that it existed.
Yeah.
And you're looking at it, you can't see that it's a right-of-way. There's some big trees growing in the middle of it. So, again, we didn't, since the city is proposing to retain all but 1 foot of the width of the alley and retain the utility easement for future possible uses, we supported the proposed vacation. There is another transportation meeting scheduled for the second Thursday of next month, and I have not seen an agenda.
Wow, sounds like there's a lot of material there, Joel. Yeah.
I'm a little bit confused about how a couple of those issues came to transportation and it didn't come to P and Z. You want to help me out a little bit? I mean,
That is a good-
If we're talking about
Yeah.
lot size and zoning and blah, 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 I'm just a little bit confused about how that is exactly transportation.
well, it's vacation of public right-of-way, and so usually Public Works and Transportation Commission would control everything within the public right-of-way. We usually control everything that's on private property, and so that's kind of the distinction.
Okay, any other comments, questions? That is, it reveals what the questions that I've been contemplating, and really I think deserves a whole lot more discussion as to exactly what is the separate responsibilities, joint responsibilities of the two commissions. It's,
Well,
it
if we're
remains
talking about
somewhat
a
unclear
foot
to
of
me.
somebody's land, we're now on private property too. I just am a little bit, it isn't clear to me. So how
Yeah, well,
and
of course,
the part that you talked about over there on on the other lane is making some kind of a little subdivision or something. The word subdivision caught my ear.
yeah, the proposal, of course, was the vacation of the overlapping right-of-ways that have been in previous proposals. It's what we call a small subdivision, since it's proposed to subdivide it into 3 lots. So those don't normally come in front of P and Z anyway. So the discussion of the subdivision basically was background for the whether or not the vacations of the rights-of-way made sense. But I really do think we need to spend some time talking about the separate responsibilities and relationships between these two commissions.
Sure.
Well, and I guess this is Wendy. I'm thinking of places like Port Townsend, where there are vacations of streets, but those have become opportunities to create pedestrian connections, all over the town. And I guess it would be nice to be part of that dialogue from planning and zoning's perspective on when those opportunities might arise. Maybe not in this particular circumstance, but certainly in general. So.
Well, I would comment that as soon as I saw the Lindy Lane one on the agenda, I was concerned because the dirt path that currently goes through the grassy lot is one of my favorite walking routes.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So I was gratified to see the proposal did in fact preserve the public access. The C Street one, I do not think has any future as a possible pedestrian connection.
Right. So Joel, I had one question for you, I guess as a comment to the Transportation Commission about the bus routes and scheduling. Are user stakeholders going to be part of that process, and in terms of, are they going to be represented in any way in terms of the dialogue about changes to it?
Well, let's say the executive director was not too specific as to exactly how this committee was going to be set up.
Yeah, because I know there are, members of the disability community that use it all the time, and there are organizations that represent them, et cetera, and others, students, et cetera. So I just wondered if they have a voice in
yeah, I'm certain. I agree with you. I'm certainly hopeful they will. Okay. They just came to us requesting some Transportation Commission involvement.
Right, gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Public
public comment. Okay.
I think you're good.
Call out to the vast
Yes.
public.
Public comment is an opportunity for members of the public to come and present ideas and comments and so on to the Planning and Zoning Commission. 5-minute limit, but that's plenty of time. Anybody watching on television, come on in and join us. One rule is that it has to be an item which is not on the agenda of the commission. So please come and participate. Okay, zoning code revisions.
Okay. So this is finally, we have the use table ordinance in ordinance form. And so right now we have pretty much different ordinances by chapter, and they actually got all merged into one ordinance. But I didn't have time to include that in your packet, so I just included all the different ordinances by chapter. And so that's what you have. Just going through kind of by subject line here. Chapter 1, kind of going through all the changes, really gives the title, authority, purpose, adoption of the comprehensive plan as it relates to the zoning code. We had ended up, I think, relocating the establishment of zoning districts into a subsequent chapter, as well as the adoption of the Moscow zoning map. Goes through the scope of the zoning code. And then the largest change in Chapter 1 would be the definitions. And those were relocated formally from chapter 11 to chapter 1. And so these are all the definitions, and we've changed quite a few of them to match the NIACS coding. And so we've gone through, pretty much all of these before. If you have any questions, something jumped out at you, I'll go through pretty quickly, but we can stop and talk about it if you see something that's out of place.
One thing that and I think I'm speaking to the proper chapter here, in the definitions, there is a definition of heavy industry. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we probably have light industrial and heavy industrial.
Where is that? The definitions of industrial did not clearly seem to me to include agricultural storage. And I'm wondering whether we have in the verbiage a proper place for locating grain bins. The definition of heavy industry appeared to me to not include it.
Okay.
I'm not sure that anyone necessarily wants to build grain bins within the city, but I don't want to preclude them.
They seem to have been taking them down in the last
Yeah,
20
right.
years.
Well,
That's for certain.
where is the heavy industrial verbiage in the chapter?
Well,
That's chapter 2?
Yeah, you're going to have manufacturing is probably
Right.
the term that we would use.
Now, where is the verbiage for just manufacturing? Which page?
It would be under manufacturing, so it's on chapter or page 11.
Page 11 of chapter 2.
First
Of
one, chapter 1.
chapter 1.
Yeah,
Chapter 1.
Okay.
There's heavy, if you see heavy manufacturing, Joel.
Yeah. Manufacturing heavy.
Raw materials, but I think they don't seem to be talking too agricultural.
No.
It seems more
Yeah.
extraction.
Yeah, handling or storage of explosive or radioactive materials or products.
We also have storage categories, so
Yeah,
storage
and
services.
again, that storage didn't seem to fit quite right either.
What would Kreitz be?
Yeah,
What
They do
that's the most
processing.
active thing
Yeah,
that we have in town.
I think we had processed a conditional use permit for them right now under light manufacturing. We're proposing to retain our definition of light manufacturing, so that's not a NIACS definition, that's just the definition we had come up with.
see, light manufacturing does not say anything about storage.
Yeah, it's. And we could certainly add that to that definition.
See, heavy, as Nell suggests, does not sound like agriculture.
No, it's more chemical production
Yeah.
type,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that 133 warehousing and storage. That doesn't really seem like they would slide in there either.
About the,
Yeah, and-
we only have, for examples, we have Kreitz and then the three big bins just out of, on the highway. I don't know how I don't know how the county describes those. Those are the newest bins that are grain storage. But certainly doesn't seem like there's much interest in other words,
Yeah.
everything in Lewiston is across the river in
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. See, the warehousing and storage, number 133, says they do not sell the products they handle. And I guess that's probably true of many grain bins around, but some of them may.
Yeah.
Well, it's heavy manufacturing, it's sort of two parts, isn't it? Extraction, processing, and treatment of raw materials, or, so would it fall under just extraction, processing, and treatment of raw materials? Yeah, it's kind of like,
Possible.
it could.
Well, usually you're
Yeah.
processing and storing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at least some of the elevators around are actually owned by various companies who do store, they do process, and they do sell.
Yeah.
They own and sell too.
Well, I can,
Yeah,
I'll go back and take a look at that and make sure that we've got it covered.
yeah.
And then if not, we can amend maybe the definition of light manufacturing
Mhm.
to include storage, because that, I mean, we're keeping that definition because that's what we've had, and in order to cover those operations, and so if it doesn't appear to encompass storage, then we can certainly add
Yeah.
storage to the
Yeah,
list. So,
Something
yeah.
something that allows grain elevators on spec.
Okay.
I mean, like,
Other-
using Kreitz as the example, it seems like that's where it would logically fit, is
Yeah.
light manufacturing.
But I'm not sure how much they actually store there, do they? Yeah. But,
Well, it's stored and then it's shipped down to the,
Yeah.
or where
Right.
they're, shipped.
right. Any other things that have?
Yeah, I caught two. 105, it's just a spelling. Through a PUD, a development may be planned, not maybe. Number 105,
Number 105? Okay.
yeah. So it's two words, not one. Halfway through it, through a PUD. a
May be
develop-
planned.
Yeah,
Right.
so that was just a little error. Then I
Right.
had a question on number 11, which is archery and shooting ranges. I don't use those things, but it says discharging of firearms at targets, because if it's archery, you don't discharge a firearm at the target, right? Specifically designed for discharging firearms at targets, and if it's archery, then that doesn't work. So, make a slight change there.
Well, it would handle half of it, right?
Yeah, that'll handle half of it.
This is Wendy. I caught one small thing, item 27, child care facility, which is the correct, more up-to-date wording for that type of use. But it's not reflected on page 7 of chapter 3, where the title is actually daycare facilities, and it should be child care facilities. So that would be page in chapter 3, page 7 of 39, and just the bit bold heading daycare facility should be consistent with the
Yeah.
definition in
Okay.
chapter 1. So,
Okay,
yeah.
I've got it.
Yeah, okay.
Other comments? Other things that anybody's caught?
Are we moving to other chapters, or are we still in chapter
Yeah, I
one?
was planning on going through all the chapters. We're just in number 1.
Okay, so we're still on
Yep,
number 1.
yep.
Okay.
Then in Chapter 2, this really covers all of our zoning districts, and so formerly we had 2 chapters. The first one for residential zoning districts, and then the second one for commercial zoning districts. We've combined those into one, and then before we go through kind of a purpose statement of each zone, we go through kind of some things that we've moved from other chapters. So establishment of zoning districts, that was moved from Chapter 1. Adoption of Moscow zoning map, moved from Chapter 1 as well. Rules for determination of zoning districts, moved from Chapter 11. And then, so we have district purposes, really remaining the same on the purpose statements of the majority of the residential zones. We add in the commercial zones here, and we've also added, formerly we had, I think, Chapter 5, we had, or actually I think it was Chapter 4, we had the 2 zoning districts, urban mixed commercial, and then university were kind of these special zones. We've included those underneath the commercial kind of zones as well. University zoning district, we've amended the purpose statement a little bit. It used to have the language that discussed how it has to be owned by the university to be Zone U. I think we've revised that. So yeah, it doesn't show the revision, but used to go into a whole lot of detail about just how the uses have to be, the property below has to be owned by the university, and really, we've talked about that issue before, and going through rezones anytime the university buys or sells property, and then we have a number of properties that are zoned university that are owned privately, and so we were going to tackle that in the next year or two to try to come up with a U district that was covered in campus, as well as a lot of the Greek Row and multifamily housing within the vicinity that would be truly inclusive of all those uses and under one zoning district. And so the statement kind of reflects that of the university zoning district, to create a district which would protect and maintain the university environment and provide for the location and grouping of compatible uses found on or in close proximity to the University of Idaho campus. And so that's really the only change that we've made for the commercial zones. And then we have a new section, overlay and specific plan districts. We've gone through some general provisions, and then right now we just have Legacy Crossing Overlay District, and that's our only overlay district. A lot of larger cities have multiple overlay districts, but right now we just have Legacy Crossing. So that gives the opportunity in the future, if we end up going that route, to do more overlays. We can certainly add those to the end of that section.
It does seem like Legacy Crossing has in that area could easily be, if the university would see its way, there could be a really mixed use in mixed owners in because you can see the private commercial university and hospital all merging in Legacy Crossing.
You can, yeah.
So I think as you think about that, it's really good to consider that. Just it just comes to my mind that the co-op has moved on campus, and while they didn't buy any land, as far you can sort of see a potential there, as it just depends on whether that's successful. But
Yep.
Any comments or errors caught, or anybody?
Okay.
Okay, move on.
Well, Chapter 3 is our permitted land uses, so this replaces the commercial zoning districts. We have an interpretation of the land use table, kind of the introduction that goes through what the acronym means within the table. We've got authorized uses, and that was moved from Chapter 11. And then we go into our land use table that we had worked on. And that, so this was the last iteration of the land use table. And pretty much go through residential uses at the beginning. We've got dwellings in residential zones, dwelling in commercial zones, group living, accessory uses, and this is in kind of the last format that we came up with, which everybody liked pretty much. And then non-residential uses, and we've got this broken down by category, which was really the last thing we worked on, was the format of the table and then breaking it out by the category. So agricultural uses, amusement and recreation facilities, animal-related business, financial and technology services, food and beverage service, manufacturing, public institutional uses, retail and personal services, storage services, temporary uses, vehicles and equipment, visitor accommodations. And then at the end, we have kind of these exceedance to the bulk and dimensional requirements. So we've got drive-through facilities and exceeding the maximum building height for permitted non-residential uses. So that's like the institutional uses in residential zones. Previously, we've processed a lot of these through variances because the institutional buildings are generally a lot taller than your typical residential. They're a lot larger plats of land and a lot bigger facilities. And so that's really the mechanism that the legislature's given us in order to exceed like the underlying height for the zone. Really not intended to be a variance. It's intended to be processed through a conditional use permit, which the kind of the criteria for approving isn't as onerous as a variance is. So we have that tucked into the end of the use table. We certainly look at, if any use caught your eye when you went through for permitted uses or conditional uses or accessory uses, things that stood out or you thought maybe should be a permitted use and they're currently conditional use or vice versa. Certainly talk about it.
Any comments? Wendy, catch anything?
Only what I already mentioned, and looking at the drive-through facility, I think we addressed a concern that was submitted by, I believe, Nancy Cheney months ago about the queuing, and so that's in there. And, additional queuing under, and that's on page 8.
Yeah, we've got drive-through facilities and then subject to the specific use standards. So yeah, we've got that. I think we worked on that and created a new standard for drive-through facilities. So yeah, we did do that.
Right, so that it didn't go into the public right away.
Yeah, yep.
And that people didn't queue up onto the blocking the sidewalk and the public right away.
Speaking of drive-through facilities, about a week ago, I was proceeding north on Main in the left lane and encountered the queue. It was about a block and a half long.
Oh gosh.
Waiting for coffee. It was blocking the left traffic lane. So there is still a remaining problem there.
So, Mike, what do you suggest? Has that become enforcement, or just where do we?
Well, it's really enforcement of backing up into the right of way. ITD would be responsible for that right of way, and so I don't know what their next step is. There was an issue with the alley because there was queuing that was allowed in the alley behind this establishment, and the business owners that were affected by this ended up complaining to Public Works Department. So now they're no longer able to queue up in the alley, which has probably adversely affected the ITD's right of way on 95 because there's less room to queue, and now they're spilling out into Main Street. But yeah, I mean, it's really, I guess, an enforcement issue through ITD or the police department in order to get those cars out of the right of way. Looking at, I think we had the example of the site plan of when they were approved and looked at how many cars they could actually queue if they were just in a tandem configuration, lined up back to back. I think
Right.
now they have 3 lanes, which allows them to queue a lot more cars. But even with just the single lane, I think I showed on the PowerPoint that they could get about 12 cars through there. So, which usually far exceeds the amount of cars that you generally see at a coffee stand. And so we have, I think, in our design standards, we came up with 5 for the queuing, amount of cars that you need to have enough space in order to have those cars queue. And so I think it's just a result or an effect of just a really popular drive-through business. I think you try to plan for the common scenario when you do uses, and I think that's pretty uncommon. Maybe common to all the rest of the same business, throughout the country, but to a typical coffee stand, I think that's pretty uncommon
I've
that
never
you have
seen
that.
anything like it anywhere. I mean, I think this is a job for the CIA. I have no idea what, I mean, I stop at every coffee shop in town. I can't not have a cup of coffee in my hand, and I've never been in a line like that, ever. I mean, there's 4 cars at Starbucks is a big deal.
There is a left turn lane, or a center two-way
Yeah,
turn lane
I don't know.
right there, but the queue that I saw backed up fully a block further.
Wow.
Well,
Longer than that.
I think if you're
Amazing.
going northbound, I think that's a double solid line. I don't think you're supposed to be turning in from going northbound and heading left in there. So I think they might look at, if you notice whenever they do special events, there's always some type of symbol there that prevents people from turning, and I think that they might have to end up going with, a permanent traffic control device there in order to prevent people from turning left, going northbound. That's really the...
My goodness. Wow.
Wasn't, is the ultimate responsibility for fixing the problem on the business owner? Or,
Well, when you start to impact the public and other business owners in the area, yeah, you have to start changing things, and that's why they're no longer able to queue in the alley anymore. And, but, yeah, I mean, it just really becomes an enforcement, and then what things can, ITD really controls their right-of-way pretty heavily, and so any type of traffic control device that they put out there, they have to go through and install it themselves and really study it. So I think that,
Do you think the state's been alerted? Is the district aware?
they are, yeah, they're definitely aware of it.
It seems like the owner is taking steps. I mean,
Yeah.
it looks like they've tried multiple
Yeah,
ways to direct traffic and wind them around.
Yep.
I mean, at the end, it might just be time to move down to the Rose Hours parking lot.
yeah.
Congratulations on your success now.
So I have a
Okay, I guess this is slightly off topic, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's just a term that I wasn't familiar with. Page 5, double I. Owner occupancy may also include a named natural person. That really just jumped out at me, a natural person. So I was curious as to where that definition comes from.
Yeah, it's just trying to raise the tone of the neighborhood.
It's back, halfway through double I.
Well, it's undoubtedly a legal term, so I can report back.
Okay. It really just jumped out.
Yeah.
Anything else?
So that is stretch.
No, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
I do like the tables.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tables are great.
Yeah, me too. And then we have, our specific use standards. So a lot of these have been moved from Chapter 12. So we have accessory dwelling units, accessory home occupations, daycare facilities, which will be changed to childcare facilities, drive-through facilities, which we just talked about that we added. Educational services wasn't formally in the specific use standards section. It was under our parking. It was kind of hidden in our parking regulations, and so when we did our off-street parking ordinance this last year, we ended up eliminating it from that section, and so we'll have to insert it back in underneath specific use standards, but we haven't changed anything. It mainly has to do with queuing of cars and parent drop-off and things of that nature. Gardens, market, community, accessory are all types of gardens in our urban agricultural ordinance, and so we have those, and nothing's changing there, as well as large retail establishments, our telecommunications facilities, so our antenna towers primarily, temporary uses and townhouses. And so those are all the specific standards, and really nothing's, not a whole lot's changing other than just shifting that from one chapter to the other and then adding a couple more in. Then we have our limitations on use section, and this is really, I don't think we have really any change in this. It's currently not in table form, we just have it in narrative form. There's limitations on uses underneath each zone, and so now, instead, since we're going from the narrative to the table format, we needed to break those out into a table, and so really nothing inserted or changed here. We've just converted those from narrative to table format.
Yeah, it seems like it's really a nice summary in these charts. I mean, the tables, they work really well.
Thanks.
More user-friendly, yeah.
They are, yeah. We're excited to start using them.
Yeah.
And then, unless anybody has any questions on that, we'll move on to Chapter 4, which is our kind of bulk and placement regulations. So this is kind of setback, height requirements. And we used to have the special zoning districts, which we had like University and Legacy Crossing underneath this, which have been moved to Chapter 2. We have an introduction that goes through kind of, explaining what the table is, and goes through, how all residential, non-residential development has to comply with the standards contained within the bulk and placement regulations table. Then cites exceptions can be found and where those can be found. So the bulk and placement table is what we had looked at before, still in the same format as the other tables that we created, and just goes through minimum lot requirements, lot widths, setbacks, exceptions to minimum setbacks listed above, common open space requirements, which generally applies for multifamily development. And so it goes through and lists it by zone. So you go through, kind of got the residential zones with a little partition in between those, and then you have the commercial zones to the right of the screen, and then just list all the quantitative requirements. So, and maximum building height, and then we have the notes at the end, which relate to different sections through there. So, anybody have any questions?
Again, I like the table.
Yeah, just congratulations. I mean, it's so much easier than trying to pick it out of a narrative.
Yep.
And I, in addition to the table, I appreciate that, especially the setback drawing of flagpole lot setbacks, because that front one, no matter how they word it, it's the drawing that speaks 1,000 words in terms of what they mean for what the front yard setback is of a flagpole lot. So I appreciated those.
Yeah, we had kind of expanded that section, so we have that exceptions to height regulations that we ended up moving to the setbacks. section, created a new section under setbacks and kind of go through, what a definition of a setback is, how you measure it, some exceptions to that, so permitted projections, exceptions to required setbacks, alternate front yard setback requirement, setbacks for flag lots. And then the access to lots and buildings, we ended up moving that from chapter 6 into this chapter. So yeah, these are the images that we had come up with. Usually the big one is measuring, if you're on a local street, measuring from the back edge of the sidewalk to be more consistent throughout the city.
Right.
And so, that was the main goal here, along with the flagpole. Nobody really understood that, and we always had to draw the diagram anyway. So it's real helpful to have these in the code, and so we can just hand these out to people, and they get a better idea of how to measure their setback requirements. So.
Right.
One of the items that's in the struck out section here is curb cuts.
Yeah.
Maybe I missed it in my skimming of the document, but is it covered elsewhere?
We ended up eliminating that because it's really a public works issue. So public works regulates that, and it's always been this odd deal because we've had it in our zoning code where we've had the requirements for curb cuts, yet public works is the one that approves curb cuts. And so if you recall, going through the street standards, they ended up inserting what the curb cut requirements were in the street standards. And so now that they have that in one of their documents, we ended up just eliminating it so we don't have this issue of having duplicate. And maybe they change their curb cut requirements in the future, and then we have to come back and change our requirements in the zoning code. So after consulting with them, we ended up just proposing to eliminate it in the zoning code since we don't really handle it.
It's been a long time since I looked at the street standard. Is it still, that still precludes a curb cut within a certain distance from an intersection?
It does, yeah.
Basically one curb cut per frontage and.
Yep.
And
It's
all still there.
It's the exact same language. They just put it in their street standards
Okay.
booklet. So.
Okay.
Would it be worth putting something in about, referring people for curb cut information to, the transportation standards? Or, if it used to be in the zoning?
Used to be in the zoning code.
Yeah.
The overall, it's never good to just have it in a resolution where it's just a document adopted by resolution because it's hard to find.
Yeah.
I think the long-term plan is to, right now we have subdivisions, our subdivision ordinance is in, I think, chapter 5. It's maybe the first, or title 5, it's like the first chapter. And so, which has always been weird because we have the zoning code and then we have our subdivision ordinance, and they're under two different titles, and so they're hard to find. So as part of this, in the kind of the next thing we'll look at doing is when we amend our subdivision ordinance, is to relocate it from Title 5 to Title 4 and just put it, since we have, we're going through and shifting all of our specific use standards, and that was moved from Chapter 12. Well, we have nothing in Chapter 12 now, and so we were going to insert the subdivision ordinance in Chapter 12, and so it's under the zoning code. And that'll free up Chapter 1 of Title 5, and Public Works is planning on doing a streets chapter. And so they have, they'll cover kind of a lot of the things that they currently don't have codified and put these into that one chapter, and part of that'll be the curb cuts since they control it. And so, but Title 5 is pretty much the Public Works kind of chapter. So that's the long-term goal, but in the interim, it'll serve in the street standards, the construction standards for the streets.
I mean, so the problem I'm thinking of is somebody goes through this and thinks that they've met all the requirements and everything, and then all of a sudden are referred to the curb cut section over in a different area.
Yeah, and we go through plan reviews on all of these and inform people of what the requirements are. So it's usually, the widths are such that we really don't have an issue. And then, once you get beyond the curb cut, you're able to balloon, taper out your driveway as much as you want. I mean, you could pave your whole front yard if you wanted to. And so, that's usually just to control access from the street and allow more on-street parking. But they're looking at, possibly revising some of those dimensions. So there's a 20-foot minimum for a width of a driveway. But in the past, you look at some of the widths of some of the driveways, like up on Sloniker, and you have just acre lots. Well, you don't have an on-street parking problem there because the lots are so big. I mean, you drive up there, you maybe see one car parked on the street, and that's it. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to, maybe it's something that's proportional with the lot instead of just a 20 universal everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what they'll probably end up looking at. But since they control it, it'll kind of be in their wheelhouse and in their code. So.
No, I'm sensitive about curb cuts because I've got 3 of them, which probably actually predates the zoning ordinance. But I paid for all 3 of them when we put the local LID in there to pave the streets, so I'm possessive of it.
It's nice to have additional curb cuts when you have teenagers driving their cars off the street.
Any other comments on this section?
Well, I had one, this is Wendy, I had one question. Mike, do you get many inquiries when people come in to where it's not obvious, where the property line, there isn't adequate room for a front yard, and so that variable averaging the other setbacks that are along that block to determine what would be required? Do you get many inquiries? Do you have to do a lot of sketches? Would it be useful to also have a sketch showing that? Showing the concept of averaging the setbacks of adjacent properties, or how that works?
Yeah, I mean, I could pretty easily put something like that together. Ever since we changed the way we measure from the back edge of the sidewalk, I haven't. It used to be a big deal. I used to get these all the time because you'd have, an older neighborhood, somebody wanted to do a front porch addition or, some other addition. And then since we have these 80-foot right-of-ways, you end up pulling the setback requirement off of the property line, and it's 20 feet into the house.
Right. Okay.
And so we always used to use kind of the alternate front yard setback because most of the houses are pretty consistent. There's usually a pretty consistent building wall along the street on most streets, and so we used to use that all the time. But ever since we switched to amending the definition of how we measure the front setback from the back edge of the sidewalk, that's really made it more consistent, and it's made it, we really haven't, every once in a while, we end up running into it, and that's only on local neighborhood streets, and so you get on a collector or arterial, and so it mainly affects commercial properties because a lot of those are on collectors or arterials, and maybe they're trying to do an addition, and they have to measure from the property line because they're not a local neighborhood street, and so that's when we start getting back into the alternate front yard where we average those. But ever since we did the amendment that allows you to average all the houses on the whole block or all the buildings on the whole block, they usually fit. We usually end up making something work through one of those provisions. But so we don't run into it. I'd say that for sure before we change the definition that it'd be good to have an image that showed, a figure that showed that, but we just don't see a whole lot of them anymore ever since we changed that.
Okay. Yeah.
What happens when you have on the streets that have no sidewalks?
Engineering makes
Go from curb?
Engineering makes a determination as to where they would put the sidewalk, and then we measure off of that.
We have people who don't believe in walking, apparently. We had that era in our lives in the 60s and 70s when we'd given up walking. We were just going to drive.
Well, hopefully we can put a past tense on that.
Yeah, it'd be nice to put a past tense in it.
Next section?
Yeah, the next one is Chapter 6, and so other than taking some portions of Chapter 6 and relocating those, really the only substantive change is the parking table. So once we got all of our uses renamed, or a lot of them renamed, we had to end up going through and revising what our current parking table was, which was pretty bare bones. It did cover quite a few uses, and we had to end up making kind of determinations, which the code still allows for. You look at comparable uses and then make a determination as to what the parking requirement should be. But it's nice to have something, established in writing that you can refer to. And so, going back through all the uses in the use table, pretty much just kept that same format and just had a column for a number of parking spaces required. And so that's what we have here.
Any comments? Or any comments about the specifics of the numbers in the table?
None.
Silence.
Silence.
Good.
Excellent day.
And then Chapter 11 is really, the only thing we really did here was just move to other sections. And so this is kind of our administration and enforcement section, and the biggest thing was we had our definitions tucked in the very last chapter at the very end. And most zoning codes, you see those at the very beginning, so they're easy to reference. And so since we've relocated that's really the biggest change in this chapter, is just relocating those. And then we had some different small sections that talked about authorized uses and rules for determining zoning districts, and then we just ended up relocating those to the appropriate chapters. And so that's really all the substantive changes that we've done in Chapter 11. And that would be it.
Comments on Chapter 11?
Nope. Not sure.
Hearing no comments, what action should we take?
Well, I think we've looked at it for the last year, but I think we have it right now in single ordinance form. So I'll probably bring it back, one more time, try to answer, some of those questions about storage for grain elevators. We could talk about that, and then a couple of the Scribner's errors that we can fix, and then maybe one more time taking a look at the hard copy, and then from there, I'd say we queue it up for public hearing.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's getting in really good shape. That's what it seems like. So.
Okay, any other comments on that procedure to be followed? Okay, sounds like we're on. We'll see it again in more final form next meeting, yes?
Yeah.
So,
Well, sorry after nobody said anything. So it's a pretty big document, so how long will the public have access to it before we hold the public hearing? I mean, I would think it'd be good to maybe have a little extra time if that's possible for people.
Okay. Well, we have our legislative hearing requirements, 15 days. And so we'll have a draft form next meeting. And then I think our next meeting beyond that is March 14th, which falls on spring break. So we probably don't want to, hold the public hearing on spring break, and depending upon our availability, how many people are going to be absent, we may even think about canceling the meeting, depending upon the attendance. But so we could, look for the second meeting in March to conduct the public hearing, and pretty much from this next meeting at the end of February, we'll have, about a month, which is pretty much double what you typically get for a legislative. And we usually publish ahead of time anyway, so when it goes to the newspaper, if we're ahead of schedule like that, we'll probably have 3 weeks notice where it'll be published in the newspaper, and then anybody can come in and look at it, and then come to planning and zoning and submit any comments they have, and then it'll be on to city council, and we'll go through the same process with the public hearing and all that. And so essentially we'll have about 2 months to review and
I'm assuming the document will be on the city webpage.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds like we're through with the zoning code revisions for tonight. Item 6 is 2009 comprehensive plan updates.
So if you recall, last time we had looked at, we had some comments from the library on insertions they would like to see in the comp plan. And they were really general last time. And so that was the comment back to them. And so I've been working with Chris Sokol, the director of the library, and she had come back after she had met with her board and kind of gave a little bit of clarification, expanded upon some of their statements. So under education, culture, and the arts, they had strong and active public libraries essential to attracting and retaining such residents. I think they've added a statement onto that to say that it is important to ensure that the Moscow Public Library has the necessary physical resources to continue and enhance its services in promotion of literacy and lifelong learning. So that was really the only addition there. And then under the implementation actions, under leveraging existing assets, at the very end, looks like it's cut off on the screen. Increase the physical capacity of the Moscow Public Library, expanding its programming, collections, and meeting space, and making innovative library uses such as makerspace possible.
What is makerspace? That
You
was my
haven't been
big
to a
question.
library recently, huh, Wendy?
I guess not the local one.
Makerspaces are kind of more like you have like co-work, Moscow Work, the like co-work establishments where you share a space and work
okay.
like that.
Yeah.
Makerspace, I think, are more of, having these spaces where people can come and use these resources. Maybe it's a 3D printer, things of that
Gotcha.
nature in order to,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, Wendy, the one at the library, at the university library now they have several 3D printers and they're doing all
Yeah.
kinds of little strange things and, people don't have a 3D printer at home typically.
Right.
And so you see, and I just was in the library in Lewiston and they have their own little 3D printers there. They're tinier, but so it's a
I just
kind
had
of,
never heard the term. I've
Yeah.
seen the spaces, but I didn't know what they were called. So, yeah. Okay.
yeah, it kind of surprised me too. It's a brand new thing. But I think as as people aren't reading books anymore, they're trying to think of what to do.
They don't, yeah. Oh, gosh. Yeah. We can blame the Seattle Public Library for starting that term.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, comments on the proposed revision?
Fine to me.
That's good.
Okay. I hear general agreement that the proposed changes are good. So,
Okay, all right.
path forward on this, what's the timeline on this?
Well, we're going to end up doing quite a bit more public outreach and public comment period on the comp plan because it ended up getting quite a bit larger than we originally thought with just updating a lot of the information in it. And so now we're just finalizing, going through all the commissions in order for them to give comments. And I think we pretty much have most of those completed. I think sustainable environment, we wrapped up the climate change section on that, but water department still, like David Hall had mentioned at the last meeting, still has some updates to do in the water section. So I should be receiving those shortly, and so we'll probably have those for next meeting. And then I think that pretty much wraps up the commission comments, and then we'll start going into planning for the, open house and public comment period portion. And so we'll start planning on that.
Question,
Yeah.
since I'm on sustainable. We haven't seen anything on the water issue. I'm thinking we're not going to. I'm thinking the water department's taking care of that.
They are, yeah, and it was mainly the water section and just updating. We had already gone through and updated PBAC. PBAC had their water action plans, and we needed to update those, and we had already done that. Things like we have our wastewater treatment plants now, the water reclamation and reuse facility. So we, have some things like that we just needed to go through and change the terms and some of the numbers as well. And so really nothing, substantial is changing. It's mainly just updating current numbers.
That was my
and,
impression.
Well, number 10, is new
Yeah.
since the last comp plan. So we've gone through and updated that, but we'll take a look at that.
Okay.
Okay, we are done with item 6. Moving on to item 7, shared readings. Wendy, do you want to make any comments on shared readings?
Well, I think at this point, we're looking at the reading on density down the road, I guess, because we had agreed that we would like to have a dialogue on how the transportation planning arm of our can work with us and coordinate and find better lines for making that happen. And so I guess I need to have. I'm receptive to any ideas you have on how we should do that. And Mike, you've probably given it some thought too. And so is Les McDonald planning to come to the next meeting, or
we haven't talked about it in length. We have the density reading posted to the website. I think we maybe plan on maybe a joint meeting. I think we have a lot of topics that we've discussed over the last 6 months to a year that kind of are more of a gray area and trying to figure out where Transportation Commission combines with Planning and Zoning and vice versa, and what we can start to, obviously better communication between the two commissions, but how we sort out some of these kind of longer range transportation issues, since we do have the chapter on mobility in the comprehensive plan. And so it seems like a lot of the things are interwoven, but in the past we've historically had different, these things have gone either to transportation or the Planning and Zoning Commission, and really not to both commissions. And so I think it'd probably be good to have some type of joint meeting, but I still need to talk to Les about whether he thinks that's doable or not. It seems like the Transportation Commission's had these pretty lengthy agendas lately, and so
sounds like it.
Yeah, with the Sturd Street corridor and the bridge. So we'll try to get that sorted out here in the next couple weeks.
So maybe then we should be looking at the density article for next year.
We've got that posted to the website, so we figure we start looking at that. I think that plays into after we kind of the use table's been our large project that we've been working on, and it's coming to the end here, and so we'll need to pick up some more code amendments, and we've got a few that have been waiting. One's been kind of addressing short-term rentals, Airbnb type rentals in the community, and then we also have plays into the density article of tiny homes and cottage housing developments and things like that. The Moscow Affordable Housing Trust has really been looking at alternate ways to get maybe smaller, more affordable homes within the community. And we asked that question on the citizen survey about tiny homes, and so we should have the citizen survey results here. I think they're scheduled to make a presentation with those results at the March 6th council meeting, I think is when Jen had said that those results should be available. So we should have some good information on, those two questions we asked about tiny homes. And so that'll kind of segue pretty nicely into picking that topic up. So
what are your thoughts on when we should schedule a discussion of the density? Or should we hold off into March, or should we look at the February meeting?
I think it's around 20 pages long, so it's not, not very long. We've had it up for, I think, a week or two now, and so I think it's doable to have it read by the next meeting, but we could certainly push it.
Well, if there's not too many other agenda items, that sounds like a good window.
Do we have any other public hearings or whatever?
We don't. We have a subdivision or two in the midst that have just submitted recently, so they're looking at about 30 days out for the public hearing notice, and so we've got those coming down the line, so it might be good to have a longer discussion about the density article at the next meeting, because we might end up getting pretty busy with private development materials that are submitted going into the spring. So.
Sounds good. Okay, so if everybody's okay with that, why don't we go with it?
Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
So you've got your reading assignment.
And it's much easier reading than the last one I threw at you.
Good.
And we do have a new website, so Ann suggested that I can just show you where it's at, but I may need your help.
Well, I succeeded in navigating it.
Planning and zoning commission. And then we've got, it's kind of hidden over here on the left side in the green. So if you click shared reading, then it'll bring up all the old shared readings. And we've got the density article right here, which is the February 2017. Should say 2018, but we'll get that changed.
And it's listed as February 2017.
Yeah.
You're behind, huh?
Yep.
Gotta catch up on our reading.
Okay, I think we're ready to adjourn.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Good. Shovel that snow for me, Nels. I get there.
Yeah, don't worry.
Don't worry.
I was in shock this morning. I couldn't even find the handle to turn on my snowblower.
Well, we'll have another couple